my big area of interest is leadership. And so here at the Institute of Integral Qigong and Tai Chi, we train people to be Tai Chi and Qigong teachers. But more important than training teachers is for me and for this institution is to train people to train teachers. So now we're talking about training trainers. And what we have discovered is that there's two qualities that I can say very briefly in probably longer conversations about either one of them, but I think people will recognize what we're talking about, is that if a person has these two qualities, one, emotional intelligence. We've already been talking about that. Are they on the path of righteousness or being curious in their relationships and communicating compassionately and non-violently? That's critical in leadership. The other thing that's critical in leadership is institutional intelligence. In other words, being able to work with other people without getting triggered and offended, and so they kind of go together, right? Having the emotional intelligence to be able to pursue an institutional collaboration.
So, Roger, awesome to have you back. We had such a good time with you. The first time was last fall, and that dropped earlier this year. And it's funny, I got, invariably with these conversations, you kind of get some folks who totally get stuff and other folks who don't get stuff. And one person said, like, I couldn't quite follow the train of thought with you guys and Roger. And then another friend was like, oh, that was amazing. I was so into that stuff. And it's just funny how it varies on where people are and what they're tuned into. But that's kind of what makes this stuff fun and interesting and different, because there's so many shapes and angles and ways to explore this stuff, whether it's yoga or Tai Chi or Qigong or just getting into some of the Alan Watts stuff. It's brilliant.
We get people saying that kind of thing all the time. They say, well, the last time didn't you change it? It's different, right? And they say, well, not really. I think what's changed is you.
There you go. They're able to receive.
Yeah.
That's a great Jedi mind trick right there.
So, there's so much going on these days. That's like the understatement of the year, I think. Larry and I were catching up, and we were thinking, it'd be great when Roger's back to talk a bit more about accessing the practice. And I know there's lots to talk about related to the three treasures and some of the research that you come across with Tai Chi Qigong. But let's just kind of jump into the power of practice.
Yeah. So there's a kind of like a gradient to all the things that happen. A day starts and then later it finishes. A life starts and later it finishes. And something about practice commences somewhere along the line. And then later, we turn to dust, and we practiced as much as we did. We cultivated and refined and evolved as much as we did. And so one of the big questions is, well, how do I get in? Because I don't think I have enough time. I don't think I'm doing it correctly. All the reasons why people find themselves, sort of like kicked out. And a lot of it has to do with this idea that I don't know enough, or that I might hurt myself. And particularly in the realm of Qigong and Tai Chi, which is my area, and, we could call that Chinese yoga, would be the reasonable thing to say, I think, in this context. Those are very gentle, non-extreme, slow flowing practices. And so the whole idea that it's possible to hurt yourself, pretty low. I know that with some of the more aggressive types of yoga, or even in the Chinese paradigm, when you get to Kung Fu, you know, then it's a little easier to hurt oneself. But what we're talking about is how do we get in? And the first answer is keep it simple. Second answer is don't worry too much about whether you're getting it right or not. It's pretty hard to hurt yourself if you're doing gentle, flowing gestures, even if you do some kind of, shall we say, non-aggressive stretching. So thing one, to be able to make practice easy and accessible and doable, is to keep it gentle and then grow into being more aggressive should you be inclined. And most of the benefits of yoga and qigong and tai chi are actually derived when it stays gentle. So in other words, we're not really going to try to win a contest, or get into a big, like Kung Fu, to get into a big tangle with somebody. So the greater benefits are available to the largest population if we keep it simple and easy and accessible and fun. And then there's this whole thing about I don't have time. And so what is the best way to enter if you don't have time? And my suggestion, and what we teach, we train people to be teachers. So this is a part of the curriculum, is to support people in looking for ways to be able to remember the value of some feature of the practice in a context where you're not actually setting aside a half an hour or more to do a set aside big deal practice. So let's think about a couple of times that one might, do something, some part of qigong or yoga, like some remembering to take a deep breath, say, for instance. Could you remember to take a deep breath if you were texting on your phone? Could you actually cultivate the capacity over time to, whenever you're texting, take a deep breath, or more than one? Like one deep breath for every text that you send. There are practices that we can do when we're going to sleep. So, before I fall asleep, I lie down and I'm not sleeping yet. So there's a moment. Could I adjust my posture in bed? Yes, I can adjust my posture in bed. Can I put myself into a modified posture? So I'm thinking, instead of just being, straight up in bed, could I modify that? Well, yeah, I could tilt myself to one side. I'm lying down now. Tilt myself to one side and bring the same knee up. So if I tilt my head this way and bring this same knee up, I'm creating a stretch. Now deep breath. Then I could go to the other side, tilt, bring this knee up. And so it's compressing on this side and it's opening on this side. And that's like a little yoga or a little qigong or whatever you want to call it that's happening before you go to sleep. And of course, there's many types of tapping on acupuncture points, or tapping on the chakras that we can do as we're falling asleep. And there are numerous breath practices that we can do while we're falling asleep. So, and then in the morning, do you wake up and then just leap into business? No. You lie there for a few moments, and then if you're a cultivator, if you're a yogin, then you're going to think to yourself, grateful for this day. Thank you for the rest. Like to just be mindful for a few moments and then do a little breath practice or whatever. We sit up on the side of your bed. Why not rub your ears, rub your feet? These are all little bits of practice that come here and there. And as we have discussed, probably at some point, there's this whole process that happens from where we were an unconscious citizen under the duress of the socioeconomic factors, political factors in our lives, and relationship, profession, whatever it is, where we're like hysterical or semi-hysterical on a fairly regular basis. And then there's the part of our lives where we've transitioned into something like what we would call, in Chinese it's called the Tao, the way, cultivating the way. Well, what is the way? The way is the way to peace. What does it mean to have peace? Well, it means when things arise that are distressing, to be able to be conscious enough to deflect the idea that this is a problem and drift in the direction of, number one, being aware that there's a problem, and then asking the question, can I solve it or can I not solve it? And if I can't solve it, like, somebody got elected and I voted and that's all done now, so then I can't solve that problem. I can vote, I can do petitions and all that stuff. I can even go and shout in the street if I want to. I put that on my calendar. That's actually something I can do something about. So now it's on my calendar. And otherwise, it's over here with, I owe this money. I owe somebody an apology. Somebody owes me an apology, and I'm going to ask for it. I have a new idea for my business. I think I'm working too much. I've got to get out of this chair occasionally. I'm going to cultivate the capacity to get out of this chair occasionally. So these are all the little features. How about this one? You're in the what they call the water closet. You're seated in the water closet. And so what can I do when I'm seated in the water closet? Well, there's you can raise your hands and do some breath practice, like what else are you going to do while you're tinkling, as they say?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So, there's all these places in our lives where we can do these small little modifications. When I go to my refrigerator, what am I doing there? Am I looking for alcohol? Am I looking for sugar? Am I trying to shut myself down, or am I trying to nourish myself? So it's lots and lots and lots about choices, and lots about being conscious enough to want to make choices and then to actualize them.
Is it fair to say that being conscious enough to make the choice is probably the hardest part? Meaning it's, just natural human behavior to just react to everything. And we see that when you're a young kid, you're just reacting to everything. And as you get older and more responsibilities, you're still reacting. Some of it's in your control, some of it's not in your control. And, it seems to be that most people, the toughest part is just trying to acknowledge that I need to create a little tiny micro space and practice to catch myself. Otherwise, I'm constantly falling and falling and falling into more reactive emotional states.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, we could blather about that, but I think the punchline is absolutely yes. And then, it's back to, well, in the yoga context, I'm sure that there's some reflection on the model being, that's like the guru or somebody like that. And then there's something about what we would call the body of information and the practices associated with that. In Buddhism, they would call the model the Buddha, but we could just go with in the Chinese tradition, the model is Lao Tzu. In the Christian tradition, the model is Jesus, and in the all the rest. And so we choose figures who model what we want to become. We notice what they have pointed to as the teaching and the practice. And then it's really helpful to have a community of people of shared values, called in the three jewels of Buddhism, the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. So this community of shared values, which can start with your neighbor or your spouse or your best friend, and eventually it can grow into the people at your yoga class or at your Tai Chi and Qigong class, people that you find yourself, shall we say, agreeing with online in some kind of virtual type community. So I think the trick is to, like you said, first just arrive at the conclusion that it's worth pursuing a more preferred way of being, and then second, to be able to look into the body of knowledge and wisdom, the sutras in Buddhism and all the great Hindu traditions and Taoism, Sufism, all those different ways of being. North American shamanism, South American shamanism, African shamanism, Celtic druids, and all of that, to go to the body of knowledge. It's interesting because I gave a lecture the other day, and I've got these books here. I'll just show them really quickly. Tao Te Ching, Ne Ye, Secret of the Golden Flower, Patanjali's Sutras, the Heart Sutra. So those are the bodies of information. So we get the idea, follow the model, read the literature, and then find like-minded friends. That's the kind of the magic formula for.
So on that note, totally with you on finding like-minded friends. And I think that's one of the things that Larry and I enjoy about doing this, and, talking to guys who have a practice or something. What would your advice be, or how would you handle engaging someone that you had to engage with? This is not somebody that you just, see at the checkout line, which you can just say, he's an asshole, and just go to your car. Like, how would you engage with somebody you really can't, leave? Like someone like your neighbor or family or coworker or someone that is not on the same wavelength, and they have to be in your life. You just can't go to your car and drive in the other direction. How do you deal with those folks?
Well, the most practical answer that I can give straight away is compassionate communication. Compassion is usually associated with having a feeling of empathy and understanding for the circumstances that the other person is in. So our default is to want to be able to win and be right. But it's almost impossible in the kinds of cases that you're talking about to just say, make your case and have the other party say, oh, okay, well, sure, that's the best idea I've ever heard. It's more like their comeback is going to be, well, wait a minute, you're not hearing me, you're not getting the wisdom that I'm trying to share with you. And this could easily be our spouse, by the way. And so the cultivation of this kind of compassionate communication requires that, aspiring to be like the model, whoever that might be, and then being willing to listen. So now there's curiosity, and you've probably heard that whole idea of like, well, you need to walk a mile in my shoes before you start coming back with how I should be like you and agree with you. And so that's all empathy, curiosity, listening, Then in compassionate communication, and by the way, the most powerful contemporary representation of this is called nonviolent communication. And it's the guru of nonviolent communication is Marshall Rosenberg. And Marshall Rosenberg is no longer alive, but wow, I mean, what a guru on the topic that we're talking about right now. And the rules of engagement that were proposed by Marshall Rosenberg is the first thing is it's critical to be curious and empathic. And then while another person is speaking, it is not the best idea. In fact, it doesn't even ever work to be spending your intellectual energy calculating how you can make this person wrong. Better to express to that person that you understood what they said. And so whether you agree with it or not doesn't matter. What matters is, did you hear it? And can you actually create a context in which the other person believes that you heard? And really the only way to do that is to say, well, now, okay, so, we're debating. I understand we're in a debate context here. But I'm very curious. I want to know how you're thinking and so forth. And so I was listening very, and as you can imagine, when you say to the other person, I was listening carefully to what you just said, that is not an argumentative point of view. And so we're already creating an atmosphere in which there's some potential, shall we say, for that person to believe that I was actually listening. And then I prove that by saying, would it be okay if I restate what you just said to be sure that I got it right? So then the next thing that happens after that, when you say that back to the other person and they say, yeah, thank you, that was amazing, you were actually listening. Then you say, would you be open to me just coming back on that with my perspective? And so now, instead of an argument, it's kind of like a discussion. And, it could easily inflame because reactive people are predisposed to reactivity and the whole default network. But it's also possible, and it can be cultivated among parties to actually realize that they are nonviolent communicators or compassionate communicators or equally curious and able to listen. Then reaching conclusions becomes much more likely. Agreeable conclusions is much more likely, but it's also very likely that neither one of these parties is going to emerge as being absolutely correct, while the other person was just dumb, stupid, wrong. Back to you.
It's fascinating that you're saying this stuff. I did a round of hypnotherapy a couple years ago, and the hypnotherapist, our very first session, she said, your homework for this next week, you got to do the daily meditation that I give you, but your homework before anything else is to just observe the people in your life and how they approach you and basically come at you. I don't want you to react. I don't want you to get entangled in the thing. Don't try to make them happy. Don't try to make them unhappy. Just observe how people are coming at you. And it was fascinating because then you do sort of step back a bit and see, oh, this is what this person needs constantly, or right? Like, oh, okay. Now I can kind of see where I can draw the line or not, or how to react. It was very powerful to do that. And then in many cases, you do start to empathize because you see what that person's needing a lot of the time, right?
Yep. Yep. So
I just want to jump back really quick to what you were saying before about cultivating a practice and sort of hit that. Do you guys notice when you meet someone who does not have a practice or who's wanted to get into yoga or Tai Chi or whatever it is, or go to the gym, there's always that like, oh God, I know I gotta go. It's like we've built up in this society or culture, whatever, in our minds of shame that like, it's gotta be this massive thing. And the first thought is, I suck and I know I gotta go, but I just can't do it. It's just a mountain to climb. And yet you're absolutely right. Once you've cracked the code, and you get into a small rhythm of it, you see that the small things can get you there. Either that or you've had an experience doing it, right? You got dragged along to some place and you meditated for the first time and it actually hit you, or you went to a really great yoga class, like, holy shit, that was amazing. Then you're kind of more interested in getting back into it. But that first thing,
people get hung up on not doing what they want to do, right?
Yeah, it weighs them down. We let it weigh us down, right? It seems like it's insurmountable, and you feel bad about it. Yeah, that's what I notice.
We have this kind of a life coaching program that we invented back in the last millennium and trained a bunch of coaches. And basically, what it does is creates an atmosphere where an individual is invited, and every individual in the world is invited to do this, whether they have a coach or not. And that is step one, associate with a feeling for why I took on this life. This is pretty consistent with yoga and qigong type, philosophies. I don't exactly know the answer, what it is, but I can give myself permission to entertain the question, why am I here? And we could call that, what was the purpose that was infused into this being at the conception that's now in the process of evolving through birth and relationships and traumas and expectations and disappointments and so forth. Coming into accord with the high view of our divine infusion is very powerful. And most people don't feel like they have no idea. Like people say all the time, wow, life purpose. I didn't even know I was allowed to have a life purpose. It's kind of like just under the influence of space-time, genes, everything. And of course, in the yoga and Taoist type philosophies, it's reasonable to consider, like, well, where did I come from? From the multiplicity of universes that are beyond space-time, wormholes and black holes, and all the cool stuff about how souls become bodies with personalities. And so the invitation to associate ourselves with a high level of purpose, which we can change. I had a dream and I realized, no, that purpose, no, so I got a new purpose from my dream, or I went to a hypnotist and learned how to hypnotize myself. And I've had some revelations about why I'm here and what it is that motivates me, what lights me up. And so in that coaching framework, which anybody who's listening to what we're saying right now can actually do while we're discussing it, is to come into association with your sense of purpose. Then think to yourself, what is my intention these days? So we go through phases in our lives. You would have a different intention as a teenager. I want to be loved by everybody. Young adult, I want to come up with a groovy career that I love doing and make a lot of money. To I'm a parent, I want to be a responsible householder. So the intention can change, but the purpose can also change. But the purpose is big, the intention is smaller. And then under the intention is the goal. And the goal might be I want to have a practice. So then I'm going to, in the context of this framework for life coaching, is the next thing that happens is that you realize that any goal, like I want to develop a practice, is made up of thousands of tiny little bits. We call those action steps. And so let's just imagine my goal is to have a practice, and I'm going to do yoga, or I'm going to join a Tai Chi class. Let's just use those. So then, what do I do to be able to navigate to being in a yoga class or a Tai Chi class? Well, I have to figure out, am I going to do it online, which is kind of cool because I don't have to go anywhere and nobody's going to see me if I don't want them to. Or do I want to join a community of people who have shared values? Okay, I'm actually going to leave my house, get in my car, and drive to where? A yoga studio, a YMCA, a Kung Fu place, or a Tai Chi place? Is there something happening at my church? Is there something happening at some kind of like the YMCA or something like that? Where am I going? And if I'm going somewhere, then which one of those wheres am I going to? And then what am I going to wear when I go? So now I have to figure out like what kind of like outfit. So I'm going to go online and say, well, what do you wear to a Tai Chi class? And then click and go to the store, buy that stuff, bring it home. But then I have to go to my calendar and ask the question, can I actually carve out some time to do this, whenever it is? And so there's a lot there that an average citizen who's not really oriented to these things has to basically blast through to be able to make the goal that's under the influence of an intention, which is under the influence of a divine purpose. And if we can line those up, if we can get those to line up, purpose, intention, goal, then we're tapping into our destiny, our essential nature. And there's chi there, there's energy there, there's life force there, there's prana there. So once we get ourselves lined up with, and there's a lot to it, right? Finding a purpose, thinking about an intention, formulating a goal, breaking the goal down into small. I mean, there's a lot there already. And then any one of those small steps is going to require me looking at a map or looking at my time, my calendar, or arranging something with my spouse. And so I think the problem is that we make these things into huge mountains to climb, as you said, but those mountains are made up of many little steps and plateaus. And we just, I hate to use the word, but discipline, let's don't use discipline. Let's use inspiration. Because if I am inspired, I'm not just discipline sounds like work. So let's go to inspired. I am inspired to get this to go, and I have my list, and I'm just going to do one of those things. I'm going to decide which shoes I'm going to wear to go to the yoga studio.
It sounds like underneath all this, what you are also really saying is like conscious curiosity, continued work at being curious.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And each fork in the road you come to that you settle on that path, all of a sudden you're 50 paths down. You've now created the thing, right? You're starting to climb the mountain, but it stems out of curiosity, which stems out of finally stepping out of the program right? Or that unconscious, I'm just going to work. I'm
Or
drinking
shifting
my
the
coffee.
program.
You're
right?
shifting the program, right? You're just doing the thing. And at some point you got to red pill yourself and go, wait a minute. What does a yoga class look like?
So
what do I look like in the class, right? And then from there.
I want to move it forward a little bit in the fact that, Roger, what have you seen in individuals who have already gotten past this first level, this first stage? They've had a practice for a few years. You can tell that they've been doing this stuff. They're not just aspiring, but they're doing this stuff. What do you see in people that that have started with not having a practice and then really gotten into something and stuck with it and continue to evolve? What have you seen in their nature, their character, their personality, their perception, their way of being?
Yeah, well, the easiest and most sort of, shall we say, mainstream response to this is that you just see people experiencing a feeling of something that they haven't felt before, that or that they have felt before, but they haven't been able to get back to, and so now they have another confirmation that it's a real thing, that feeling. And that can translate into so many things. I remember one person who would say, I always regretted that I didn't have a certain conversation with my father before he died. And in the class today, I actually had the experience of being in the presence of my father's spirit, and I was able to share with him in a context of me apologizing and wanting to make things right. And I feel so much lighter. I mean, that's just like so powerful. And then, of course, there's all the stuff about people who feel better physically and have more energy. That happens all the time, too. But my big area of interest is leadership. And so here at the Institute of Integral Qigong and Tai Chi, we train people to be Tai Chi and Qigong teachers. But more important than training teachers is for me and for this institution, is to train people to train teachers. So now we're talking about training trainers. And what we have discovered is that there's two qualities that I can say very briefly in probably longer conversations about either one of them, but I think people will recognize what I'm talking about, is that if a person has these two qualities, one, emotional intelligence. We've already been talking about that. Are they on the path of righteousness or being curious in their relationships and communicating compassionately and non-violently? That's critical in leadership. The other thing that's critical in leadership is institutional intelligence. In other words, being able to work with other people without getting triggered and offended, and so they kind of go together, right? Having the emotional intelligence to be able to pursue an institutional collaboration. So those two, okay, so now let's do the math. This is really interesting. So we've trained about 5,000 people as teachers and practice leaders over a period of 25 years. And of those, some of those people become excellent teachers. Not all of them, some of them. And of those, some of them aspire to be trainers. And it's kind of easy to be a trainer. I mean, you just have to know the curriculum and provide it in a reasonable context. So then the next step up from that is to be a part of a training team who's actually working through how to produce and deliver a training event. So we go from 5,000 to maybe like 100 And then we go to somewhere around 20. So in other words, of all the people that we've ever been exposed to who could potentially aspire to be a leader, we end up with 20. So there's your answer. Is it possible? Yes. Is it likely? No. No. But people could still be practitioners.
Mm-hmm.
Great. We've won a lot of those. We want millions of those. And people can still be great teachers. We want millions of those. But in terms of being trainers who can actually collaborate at the production level, teamwork, planning, all that, it's a very small number.
The notion of the power of the practice and how to create one and sustain one and evolve one is it's a great topic, and I think this is a great one for us to hit today. I'm just curious around the horn, starting with Roger. What are your types of sort of micro actions or practices that you do in a given day? And then when you do have time to devote to a more larger, more formal practice, what does that look like?
Yeah. So the things that I described, practicing in my car when I'm driving along and the traffic's going well, or especially when the traffic's not going well, breath practice. There's a steering wheel right here. I can put one of my hands around the steering wheel, while I'm just stalled in practice. And I'm not actually turning the wheel. I'm just like, shall we say, doing a gesture that is going around, which is very classic in Tai Chi and Qigong and so forth. The before bed thing, I do it every day. I mean, every day for decades, I do breath practice, and I do these stroking I'm stroking my belly button, I'm stroking my heart, and then I'm tapping on my liver and spleen down here. At the same time, my eyes are closed, and I'm doing look left, look right, look up, look down, make a circle left, make a circle right. So I'm doing eye exercises and tapping and breathing exercises at the same time. And it's just, what am I going to be doing during that period of time anyway? I might be regretting what I didn't get done during the day. I'd rather not do that. So the one on the toilet, if I get up at night, I do that, pump the lymphatic system, just turn the whole kind of neurotransmitter system on. If I have a hard time going back to sleep, I do certain breath practices, simple, accessible. We call the elixir breath, where you breathe in, hold for a moment, breathe out slowly through the nose. All these pranayama practices that are very widely most people are aware of. Food choices, of course, hydration. I drink a lot of tea. So then going on from, and of course, then I have my practice, the set aside time practice, which is the second question. And in that context, I think it's important for me to have locations. So I have a location in my house. And remember that Tai Chi and Qigong are often done standing. And so in my house, I do some yoga stretches and put a little weight on my ankles and so forth and fiddle around with that. So that's my first place of practice. But I have a second location of practice, which is right outside my house. So people could think, patio or porch, or if you've got a backyard, or whatever. And then I have a third practice place. It's about 100 yards from my house in a forest. And I have a fourth practice place that's about a mile away. And so whenever I can, I go a mile away because I turn one way and I see mountains. I turn another way, I see an ocean. That's kind of an inspiring place to be. If I don't have quite that much time, then it's to the 100 yards away, where I'm in a forest, birds singing, look up, see clouds passing, go to my yard. It's like a few seconds, I'm in my yard, and then I can practice inside. So I think one of the secrets to having a consistently available practice that feels compelling is to try to figure out somewhere in your house that we could set aside and kind of tidy up and use, and then have these other places to practice. And as you know, in yoga, there's lots of flow type practices that are done standing. So you don't necessarily have to roll out of the yoga mat when you get out into natural areas. So I would say that's my reply on the around the horn. And I think that my big idea is to have more than one place to do it.
Mm. Mm. Larry, how about you? What are the small things you do to stay sane and get through the day? And then when you have time, what does a bigger practice look like for you?
Well, as you know, because we talk many times during it, I got to walk the dog every day.
Mm-hmm.
Because he's got to go also, but because I love going out there and walking. Walking is a big thing for me. So that happens every day, and that's anywhere from 3 to 4.5 miles a day. So about an hour or something outside, obviously, and in and amongst some phone calls, taking some time to look around, take in nature and the trees and breathe and smell the air and whatnot. And then I'm trying more to not jump out of bed, but take a moment, even when the alarm goes off. I did it this morning. I had to teach this morning. Alarm went off at like 5 or 6. And rather than just get out of bed and get downstairs and start the routine, just lay there, take a few deep breaths, and start to wake up and also embrace the quiet of the morning. I do a little something before each class that I teach on my own before people come into the room, and some breathing, some deep breath. Could just be child's pose, some deep breaths in child's pose. And then to keep it active, I will meditate with my classes at the end of class with that group also. I don't just sort of tune out and look at my phone while they're in their final pose. This morning I set the timer for 4 minutes, and I usually join in with that type of stuff. So a longer thing would look like rolling out the mat and 30, 45, maybe an hour of practice on my own. And a lot of that is like sometimes that practice for me is like just trying to get out of my head, put on some tunes, and just move and flow with whatever feels good to go from one pose to the next, and not overthink it like a yoga teacher, but turn all that stuff off and just move my body with what feels like is needed, And you, sir?
Yeah, I would say, and Roger, Larry and I commiserate a lot. I don't know if commiserate's the best word, but
it's a good one.
We share and acknowledge the fact that at this stage in our life, in our 50s, we're dealing with children and kids and our families and spouses and partners. And we've got, an aging parent or parents. And we've got, various jobs or things that we're responsible for throughout the day and the week. And I think it's hard sometimes when you're in that much state of flux that it's hard to pin down small and definitely larger practices. I also have a 9-month-old baby, and it's been a constant state of change and figuring out where to find my own time to deal with stuff and just in process where I'm at. And for me in the morning when I get the baby up, I take the baby down to, the basement and, put down a nice Pendleton blanket and put the baby on the blanket. And, while she's doing her moving around on her back and getting oriented with the day, I am starting to check in with my body and I sort of see how I feel and what's going on. And so I'll do some little easy stretches while I'm trying to interact with my daughter. And, I think there's just little moments of trying to get a mini little practice in. And I would say a lot of that's just kind of flossing the joints, when you can, when I'm not totally present with the baby, at the moment, if I'm on my own, I might if I have a fraction of time, roll out the mat and do a child's pose or some kind of quick around the horn, on the back or on hands and knees and doing sort of some rotations. There might be a little core work or some bridge work. And when life is moving fast, you just want to find some time to kind of check in and do an around the horn on your own body. And you don't have time for a full practice. Like Larry, there's walking the dog. I hate to admit it, but more often not, it's checking in on a few podcasts that just to catch up on what's going on, regrettably. And then sometimes it's just finding some music that actually is more instrumental. And then that usually is something that kind of gets me to the idea of just turning off the phone and just in dealing with the sounds that are around you and the dog. And I think that kind of calms the nervous system, that kind of grounds you a little bit. It's but that is sort of good time to check in on where you're going. And if I have more time to do stuff, I will probably look to actually go to a yoga class at another studio and let another teacher kind of take control and take the reins and take me to a place where I can just let somebody else drive for what we're doing today. And that's incredibly helpful. The two other micro things that I do is if I'm also in the checkout line, I usually will try to ground my feet and try to find my arches in the feet. Where's my big toe? Where's my heel? Where's my arch? It keeps me from actually looking at my phone and perhaps not engaging with the human that I'm trying to, that I appreciate is there versus the self-automated checkout, which never really works. And the other spot actually is when I'm playing hockey on a Saturday morning. When I'm playing hockey, I am way more aware of where I'm at in my skate, in my boot, and where my balance is. Partly just to make sure that I don't catch an edge or I don't get in a bad spot where you're going to have an injury. But I'm way more tuned in on the ice. And I think that comes with making sure you're not, overextending yourself and creating a situation that is going to compromise your safety, kind of doing what we do on the ice.
I think if I can just jump back for a second.
No, Larry, you don't jump back. You've lost that moment.
Is that the three of us have talked a lot in our little practices about doing something physical. But I find, Derek, especially with you and I, because we're constantly talking about it, we're trading books, I find just staying in the conversation about this stuff, that's what I've appreciated about joining this podcast, is that we got a guest coming up, we got to read this book, right? It's led to that book and then the next book and then this thought and that thing. And so even just reading about it, talking about it with people and other teachers and other friends and growing the community, just staying within the conversation of the thing, to me, is a form of the practice. And maybe that's where people start, if you feel like, I really don't have any time to get up. Well, then I don't know how you don't have time to read, but whatever. Maybe it's that. Maybe it's just starting to read something or the Rolf Gates book, where it's a daily paragraph that you read. And it's just something that, okay, I didn't get on my mat for the last 4 days, but I woke up every morning and I read this thing and I was thinking about it, and that cultivated that sense within you.
Yeah, I think the that we've come up with here is that there's going to be necessarily some smaller, less impressive little doorways in here and there. At some point, we get it, that there's real value in that. And then from there, it starts to multiply. And as we multiply, the benefits seem to be accruing at a greater consistency, and that becomes compelling. And pretty soon we realize that, we could actually be a teacher to other people. And so now we're in deeper again. So it's a beautiful, people think of it as this big thing that I've got to solve, but it's actually a lot of little things that sort of build into something with a sensibility about it, which then the light goes off, and we get, wow, there's something here, and I find myself multiplying it, and now I think it'd be cool if we multiply it at a greater rate.
Mm-hmm. I think teaching too, right, is a form of the practice.
Yes.
Because again, you're staying in the conversation and you have to impart this stuff. And I find the best way to impart this stuff is to draw from your own experience. So you're constantly reflecting on, oh shit, I shouldn't have had that beer last night. Or I made this choice to do this, and then you can share that wisdom. And by sharing wisdom, you're practicing the way with Uncle Roger.
Yep.
That's right. Well, Roger, thank you for coming back and sharing the wisdom yet again with us.
Yeah, man.
We love having you on. We look forward to having you back some more to keep on going down these little, through these doors into these different topics and aspects of the practice. So thanks again for being here.
Oh, what a pleasure. Wishing you many blessings, and to all listening, looking forward to seeing you again and again.
Namaste, sir.